Today we're going to be talking about unified data collection. But before we start, I just wanted to give you a couple of notes. One, in your browser, you can click the slides. So that'll make the slides larger and it will reduce my ugly mug so you don't have to look at it for 45 minutes. Also, I have a couple people in the chat pod that are willing to help answer your questions, and I'll keep my eye on it as well. So if you have any questions as we go along, I'd be happy to answer. Okay, so if you pay attention to the news at all, especially around the holiday season, you may have seen headlines like this in the news. And it's a lot about e-commerce and predicting the sales for the holiday season or retroactively looking back and saying how much it is the prior year. And for some people, that might seem very interesting or odd because they think that Adobe is a Photoshop company or an Illustrator company. But as many of you know, there's a whole different side to Adobe that is around the experience, especially around e-commerce. And that's why we can provide this type of data. So our customers use our products to send data to our servers and then use our reporting and analyzation products to actually go in and see what's going on their websites and in their mobile apps, and even match that up with offline data to see what's going on across channel. So let's talk about what the different aspects of data collection are. The first one is identification, and I'm going to be kind of talking about mostly kind of orienting it toward website analytics, but a lot of this applies to mobile analytics, other types of analytics as well. Data collection has identification. So if a user comes to your website and then they leave and then they come back to your website, it's good to be able to identify that user as the same person, because we probably know things about them now. We know what they're interested in, what kind of products they're interested in. Maybe they were looking at a product previously, and so when they come back to their website, we want to, is this product again, or what else might thing. And we can only do that through identification, understanding who that person is. The other thing is analytics. So we want to see how the user got to the website, how they flowed through the website. If they put a product in their shopping cart and then left the website, where in that process, the conversion funnel, did they actually fall out? And there's a lot of other analytics use cases as well. Audience management is taking the traits of that we know about a certain person and seeing how they're common across different people and putting people with common into a group. And things, once we have these people set unique messages or send them emails that are targeted toward that trait or that group of people. So the next one is personalization. That's actually rendering the content to the website for that particular audience segment. And then privacy. If a user doesn't very concerned about their privacy, make sure that our customers have to respect that and not have this stuff happen unless the end user is actually okay with it. Okay. So to understand what unified data collection is, it's kind of important to understand where we came from, our heritage a little bit. So Adobe is a story of acquisitions as far as the Experience Cloud goes. And over here on the left, you'll see some products that Adobe has acquired over time. And each product had its own JavaScript file that our customers would need to implement on their website. And this could be going to the different product that we purchased and products, finding the snippet of code that they needed to copy and then paste into their HTML on their website. And that can be quite tedious, especially if there are 5 different libraries, and then reading the documentation for those libraries and understanding their APIs and where they send data and how that all works. We did create Adobe Launch. The idea of Adobe Launch is you put one script tag on your website And then we provide you a user interface that you can go to, and similar to how you would install apps on your phone, you could install different tags on your website. So while they no longer needed to go copy paste different snippets of code onto their HTML page, they could use Launch to do that for them. It was still kind of a fragmented experience because Launch was loading different tags, different libraries onto the website, and they still needed to understand some of that complexity. This is kind of what it looked like. So the products, some of the different products that Adobe provides are on the left, and each of those libraries, whether through Launch or just standalone, will need to get loaded onto the end user's browser. And then the library would send data to its respective product's server, and then that would end up in the respective product's database. And then afterward, we would try to integrate that data on the back end, try to integrate the libraries on the front end so that they were all coordinated with each other. And it worked okay, but we still had lots of room for improvement. And so that's what unified data collection is all about. And this is kind of the new grand vision of unified data collection. So over here on the left, we have a web SDK, so a single SDK for implementing Adobe products on a website. We have a single SDK for implementing Adobe products on a mobile app, and then we have server-to-server API integrations as well, so that you can send data from a server to Adobe Experience Platform. The data comes in, and it's important to understand that the data for multiple capabilities, so let's say analytics and personalization and identity, they could all come through the same request. And then the edge network receives that request and basically federates it out on the back end. So this red part over here on the right, it could send it to the different products, including Adobe Experience Platform. And we're going to look at that a little bit more later. I'll show you kind of how that's done. The other interesting part about that is this bottom part, the dark gray. With Adobe Experience Platform Launch server side, you'll be able to, it's in beta right now, but it will soon be in production. You'll be able to take the data that's coming from, say, the web SDK, manipulate that data, and based on rules, you can say, send it to this third party or this third party or this third party, and it will go from the Adobe Edge Network, our servers, to these third-party servers. The idea here is that hopefully it will allow you to be able to remove the number of JavaScript libraries or reduce the number of JavaScript libraries that you have on your website, and instead do that from the server, send that data off to the third-party servers from our servers. Okay, the other thing we did is unify the data modeling. So with our, what I'm calling legacy libraries, we had things like props and evars for analytics. We had inbox params for target. We had signals for audience manager. And a lot of times these were basically predefined slots, and customers would put data into these slots. The problem is those slots didn't really have semantic meaning for our customer. For example, prop 23 or evar 13, those names don't mean anything to our users. They mean something to us, and we're just asking customers to fill them out. And so with the Adobe Experience Platform, we wanted to shift that so that customers were in charge of the structure of their data, and they could call it meaningful names. So they do that by creating an Xdm schema. So over here on the right, I have an example, just a very simple example. But if I were a car reseller, I could have an Xdm schema with 4 different fields that were make, model, color, and year. Those mean something to me and the people that work at my company. I'll show you an Xdm schema, like how you'd actually go build it in the Adobe Experience Platform in a little bit. We also have something called the Unified Edge Configuration. So previously there was a bunch of configuration that had to be done on your website, which we wanted to improve, because anytime customers didn't really like when you had to modify configuration on the website, because if they weren't using Launch, they would have to coordinate that change oftentimes with their IT department or engineering department and go through the usual engineering release cycle, and that can actually slow down time to value. With Launch, it made it a little bit easier, but but still people didn't really like to, add more JavaScript libraries to enable a particular product from Adobe, for example. And so what we're trying to do is take whatever configuration we can away from the website and put it onto our servers and provide a user interface where you can configure that thing. So this is an example screenshot. And as you can see, for some products, you can actually enable or disable the product or configure certain things about the product without actually having to deploy any new code change to the website. Instead, the Web SDK will send a request to the Edge network, and then the Edge network will know, based on the Edge configuration, what type of data it needs to send back to the client. There are a lot of performance benefits to unified data collection. This is one of the biggest things for our customers. Performance really does equal money, and so we wanted to boost performance in this process. The first thing we did was we consolidated the library. So instead of a bunch of different libraries, we now have one. And it wasn't just taking those different file contents and smashing them into a single file. We wrote it from scratch with all of the stuff that we've talked about in mind. So it also allowed us to reduce, we got to remove the redundant logic, I guess, that we had across different libraries. We got to remove the logic that we had for coordinating libraries that was kind of complicated before. And we were able to target fairly modern browsers. So the latest, Edge, Chrome, Firefox, Safari, and then IE11. And so by all of this, we were able to reduce the size of the library quite a lot, which is great. We were able to consolidate requests for multiple capabilities. So like I said, I think I mentioned this, the Web SDK can make one request with information about identity and analytics and personalization, and instead of multiple requests, right? So that can go in one request, and the Edge network can respond with a single response with information about these different capabilities as well. So fewer requests. The other thing is we had to sometimes sequence requests. So with the legacy libraries, we would actually have to go create, we'd make a request for an identity. So we'd establish an identity for the user. And while we were waiting for a response from the server, we were not able to render personalized content for the customer, for the user. So we'd wait for the identity response to come back for the server, and only then would we create a personalization request to go get the personalized content for the user. So that request would then go out, and we'd get the content back, and then we'd actually render the personalization content. So that took a long time. And now that we can consolidate capabilities into a single request, it's much faster. There's one request, one response. We now have personalization content and an identity, and we can render that content out. We have a consolidated domain. So instead of different libraries sending to different domains, they now send to a single domain. And there are performance benefits there. Fewer SSL handshakes that have to happen, and fewer DNS lookups to convert the domain name to an IP address. And that is a performance boost. With the launch server side, we are reducing the number of third-party libraries that you have to install on your website for all the different marketing technologies you might want to implement on your website. And then we have a bunch of different workflows that were also improved. So not just performance, but like how our customers get things done. The first is that there's a single library to install, and that's great. Whether standalone or through launch, you just have one library to install. You have simplified debugging because there are, the capabilities are now consolidated into a single request to a single domain. So like looking through network rows in your network tab inside of Chrome or whatever debugger you use is a lot easier. We also have a debugger extension for Chrome and Firefox that have some really interesting things. So for example, if you send data from the Web SDK to the Edge network, not only will the debugger tell you show you the data that was sent to the Edge, but it will trace that data as it flows through the Adobe network. So as it gets to Adobe Experience Platform, if it validates against the schema, which we're going to show a little bit more of, it will also show if the data was sent to a third party through server-side launch and how that server responded. And so you get a much more transparent idea of what's happening with your data as it flows through different systems. Like I said, with the edge configuration, we're reducing the amount of on-page configuration that has to be done, which can simplify things for some customers. Semantic data modeling, so they can talk about data as they want to. And then a simpler API. So there's just one API to learn instead of a bunch, but also we added some nice things in there that make it simpler as well. Consent is built in. So the Web SDK will not write any cookies or make any requests until we actually have received consent from the end user, if the customer cares about consent and has implemented that on their website. That's totally configurable. We now host the Web SDK through servers that we manage, which is great for speeding up time to value for our customers. Instead of them having to figure out where they're going to host a library, they can use our CDN if they choose. But self-hosting is still possible if they want to host it on their servers. And then the Web SDK is open source. And this is kind of like, for me, it's a big deal. It's important when our customers are trying to implement our technologies that they can understand how it works and, step through line by line as they're debugging, or if they're trying to help another person that's trying to figure out how it works, they can point to lines of code. And then some of our customers find it very important to audit our code, whether it is for security or performance or whatever. We want to give them the fully unminified code that they can scan and audit however they want. And so we have done that. Okay. So now is time for a demo. This is great. How are we doing on time? Okay, we're doing good. Okay, so let me hop over to Chrome here. And this is the demo website that I've set up. It's called We Travel. It's a travel booking. And you can book travel online. The first thing we want to do is we need to set up a schema in Adobe Experience Platform. So I'm going to switch over to there. Right now we're looking at data sets. So over here, this is the Adobe Experience Platform user interface. Over on the left here, we have data sets. I have selected data sets. And there's a data set here called We Travel Data Collection Demo. What is a data set? A data set is a bucket where you can put data. It's like a database table. You put data in there, and there's essentially what you could imagine rows of data in there. But the bucket needs some sort of description or some sort of schema that defines what the data should look like before it goes in the bucket. And that's what the schemas are all about. So I can actually apply a schema to multiple data sets if I want to. But the idea of the schema is I'm just describing the data that's going to go in a data set. So when the data, right before the data goes in the data set, the Adobe Experience Platform validates the data against the schema and looks to see if it's valid, if it matches the schema. If it doesn't match the schema, it's not going to put the data in the data set. It's going to reject it. Only if it's valid will it put it in the data set. So let's go look at the schema. You can see here that this data set has the We Travel Data Collection Demo schema applied to it. So if we go over to schemas, and we see the schema, We Travel Data Collection Demo, and I'm going to click on it. And let's see, can I hide that? Yeah, okay. So this is the schema. And you can see over here, there are a bunch of fields. This is kind of like columns of a database table, kind of. The difference is, one of the differences is that it includes nested data. So if you think about each row in the data set being a JSON object, we are defining what each JSON object looks like. So the way I added these fields to the schema was by adding what are called mixins to my Xdm schema. So over here on the left, you can see there are 3 mixins. The first one is the AEP Web SDK Experience Event mixin. If I select that, you can see that mixin added is the device environment. Now, because the Web SDK automatically collects certain pieces of data. Now you can configure that so that some of the automatically collected data is not collected. But this makes it easy. You just add the mix in, and then the Web SDK can do its thing. So if we pop these fields, web page, for example, and the refer here somewhere, and up here we have device screen width and screen height. So those are some pieces of data that are automatically collected, but it's configurable. I'm going to skip this booking one just for a second. This next one is experience event commerce details. We provide basically building blocks for you to use. So you don't have to build this all from scratch, but we provide a building. So if you're an e-commerce customer dealing with an e-commerce website, then it's very likely you're going to share a lot of the same fields that other e-commerce websites do as well. So you can add the commerce mix in to your schema, and it adds things like, if we look in here, order, payments, currency code, price total, things like that. Things that it added to my Xdm schema. And then for demo purposes, I added this other mix in. This is very specific to my company. I mean, there are other travel booking agencies out there, but there's not an Xdm, as far as I'm aware, there's not an Xdm building block for a travel agency booking. So I've created it. You can see the fields. I specified what the seat, service, and I can add another field here by field. But if we look at each of these, like flight designator, that's kind of like that's a flight number, what we commonly call a flight number. You can see I've said it's a minimum length of 3 and a maximum length of 6, for example. Service class must be either first, business, or economy. And so if it's not, if that data comes in and it's not, it's going to reject it, which is great. It keeps our data clean. Okay, so that's an Xdm schema. So our data that we send needs to match that. We're going to hop back to the WeTravel website. I'm going to open up, let's see, I'm going to okay, I'm going to come back to this homepage right here. Take a look at this title right here. It says, "Enjoy your freedom." Okay, that's going to become important a little bit later in the demo. Now look at the page source for the homepage. You'll see that I have this script tag right here. I hope you can see that. This script tag loads launch, the launch library, onto the website. And we're going to deploy the Web SDK through the launch library. Okay, so let's look at how launch is set up. So I'll hop over to here. I'm going to refresh our session. Okay, so here's our property. I've installed the Web SDK extension, and we won't look at the details there too much. But what is most important is if we go over to rules, what happens when the user is on my website? So I have 2 rules. One is track page view and render personalization. So if I go into this rule, what it's saying is whenever the launch library is loaded, we're going to take an action. So on every page, when the launch library is loaded, we're going to send a page view event to the server, and we're going to render any personalization content that comes back. See, I'm using the send event action, and the event type that I'm sending to the server is a page view. And the only other thing that's really important here is render visual personalization decisions. So if we get any back, we're going to automatically render it at that time. Okay, the other rule that we have, we'll go back to rules here. The other rule that we have is track purchase. So when the that in just a second. When the launch library finishes, and this condition passes. This condition says, is it the confirmation page? And we're going to send a purchase only on the confirmation page. Take the action of send. If we hop into this event, we'll have, and then we're using term, and we're not going to go into. The idea here is, if there is .data, that object to the edge network. Okay. Where we and then we're, yeah, that's already set. So let's go back to our, we're on the home page here. Freedom. We're going to act like a user. We're going to go to countries. We're going to go down to France. France is pretty interesting. Let's take a look at which packages are available. These are looking pretty interesting. But this one right here, Paris and Versailles Mega Tour, looks particularly fantastic. So we're going to click the Book Now button. And that takes us to a confirmation page. Did I click it? Yeah. So this takes us to a confirmation page. I have basically like skipped over the whole checkout process, like providing credit card information and all of that, just for this demo. This takes us to the confirmation page. It has some information about our flight and our seat and our service. That's great. So let's look at the code inside, inside this page. So again, we have the launch library being loaded, but I also have a data layer defined. This data layer, a data layer is just an object with information about the page that the user is on, and maybe information about the user or the product or whatever. In this particular case, my data layer happens to matches the schema that I've set up in Experience Platform. If it didn't match that format, then I would need to manipulate that data layer to match the schema that my data set is using, so that it actually validates and gets placed into the data set. For simplicity for this demo, I just made it match. So you can see here that this structure matches the schema that we were looking at in the platform. So what should have happened is really two things. Let's go back here. Let's open up the network tab, and I'm going to refresh the page. And I'm just going to filter these network requests down to interact. These are the requests that the Web SDK are making to the Edge network. The first one is our page view event. So if we look at the request body, we'll see an event here. We see XDM, and we see this data. We see event type. There's the page view event type that we looked at in the UI. And all this other data that you see alongside here is automatically collected by the Web SDK. And we talked about that a little bit. So web page details, here's the URL, for example. So that's great. That's not really the interesting one, though. The interesting one is this one, the second interact call. That is recording our purchase. So if we look at the request payload, we go down to events, XDM. Event type here is commerce.purchases, and you can see commerce showed up. So it took our data layer, it basically cloned it, and then applied any automatically collected data onto it and sent it off to the server. So you can see the information that came from our data layer on, like order, currency code, payments. We can see that it was paid for by a gift card. And then we have here our booking information as well. And so that's making its way through the Experience Platform into the data set, into different products that need to use it. Also, this is also very interesting. I have set up launch server side. So let me see if I can hop over here. So In a server-side launch property, I have configured a rule such that when that payload that we just sent to the edge network is received by the edge network, and it will run this rule on that data. And the condition I have is, does a purchase ID exist in that data? If it does, then I want to send the purchase ID to a webhook, some third-party webhook. So if I just hop into here for a second, you can see that I'm going to make a request to webhook.site. That's just a debug. Like it's really nice for testing out webhook integrations. It's a stub basically. So we send a request to webhook.site, and we're going to be sending the purchase ID. Again, we're using a purchase ID data element to actually pull the purchase ID off the payload coming into the edge network, and we're going to attach it to this query string, and we're going to make a request out to that webhook site. Cool. So what I should see is if I hop back over here and I go to the webhook site, you can see that the requests have come in. So in other words, the data came from my website to the edge network. It ran that rule and it saw the purchase ID, and then it sent the purchase ID over to this webhook. Now, just to get an idea of like how fast this is, if I go back to the confirmation page, just look at this tab up here, and that's reporting when the request actually hits that webhook. And I'll just refresh here. Okay, so the page is loaded, and that incremented to 2. So those requests are just, hitting edge network and being sent out to that webhook. And it's really cool. I like it a lot. So hopefully that will allow me to remove other JavaScript libraries from my page. Let's see. Oh yeah, the one more thing that I wanted to show is, now that I have booked this tour, We Travel knows that you are interested in France. That means we can start catering content to what you enjoy. And one thing we can do is, if you hop back over to home, for example, you can see that we now say Bon Voyage. And that's kind of cool. If we actually look at the requests here, we can see that on the response, so this is our page view request that's registering that the user actually viewed this page. In the response, if we dig in here, we can see that this content, Bon Voyage, came back from the server, from the edge network, and then the Web SDK actually rendered that for us in the location that was defined. And this content and this location was all defined inside of our target product user interface. This other request is the Web SDK automatically sending some data back to the edge network saying the Web SDK rendered the personalized content for the user. So that allows you to go through our products and analyze data and say, okay, this type of personalization content was rendered for this number of users, and this is how it converted. If you're trying to track a conversion based on particular personalized content, that's very useful as well. The only other thing that I wanted to show was that for this demo, I actually, I went through launch and I set up a launch property, and I copied the embed code and I pasted it inside of the page source like I showed you right here. If you're a Magento user and you have a Magento website, you don't really necessarily have to go through the same process that I did. Instead, there's a Magento integration. So if you go to your Magento dashboard and you go down to stores, I hope I'm still logged in. I might not be. Okay, I have to go through this again, but bear with me for a second. Okay, so I'll go down to stores, go to configuration. And then if I scroll down to Adobe Experience Platform, there's an item called Launch Provisioning. So here, there's this button that says create launch property. So if you go through this process, it will create a launch property for you, and it will automatically configure your Magento property, your Magento website, to have the embed code that I had to manually paste into my HTML code. And then, just like I did, you can go into your launch property and configure rules, deploy them to your website, etc. So that's it. If you have questions, I would be very happy to answer right now. It doesn't look like we have any yet, but I'll stick around anyway. And if you have questions or want to see more parts that I didn't actually show in the demo, let me know, and I'd be happy to walk through that. Thanks.